Welcome to another episode of Don't Panic Geocacher. My name is Arjen and I go by Waterfan5 on the geocaching.com website. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how smiley and emojis, as you see displayed here around the title, can be used in geocaching mystery puzzles, and I'm giving some examples of puzzles that you may encounter. So, smileys or emojis, it's really just the same thing, are little symbols that you've seen on the websites. So, it started out with a little smiley face, and right now there's standards that are over 1,000 different ones that exist across multiple platforms. They're really standardized within the systems, and that means that they're ideal to be used into puzzles because they're consistent across different platforms, Windows, Mac, different systems, but also phone and laptops and tablets. And if you think about an emoji, what they can be used in a variety different of ways. So all the other puzzle examples that I've shown in other videos can really be converted to somehow use an emoji. So the easiest one could be a substitution, and I'll give an example of that on one of the next slides, where I talk about how each emoji can represent a different number. You just have to figure out what emoji uh, represents what number. You can also use them as binary. One emoji represents 0, the other one represents 1, and now we have a binary puzzle. And somewhat unique or maybe different with emojis because you have so many different ones is that they can easily be used to draw out something, either differentiated by type or by color. But most important, and I will go into that at the end, is as I mentioned, these emojis don't have random numbers. They actually have predefined numbers, and in each language actually have a predefined name that is standardized in the so-called Unicode standard. And I will show you those lists as well later, because this is often a source that is being utilized in puzzles. So this is a very standard way of how emojis are being used, and that is as a so-called substitution. Each emoji, because you have many different ones, represent a number, and you kind of have to figure out which one is 0, which one is 1, which one is 2, etc., etc. This can be very tricky because there is literally hundreds of different ways that somebody could have taken a subset. And I've shown you some examples here of standard emojis that are being used, for example, pain indicators or happiness indicators, or the emojis that you can select on the geocaching.com website. And this order is not always stable, and you might run the risk that the puzzle might break over time. Yet this is still a very popular used mechanism. So I used an example here that I just made up for this presentation and showed you a puzzle. So I give you the posted coordinates. And what I'm doing here is a standard technique that I've used in other videos as well, where I talk about that you kind of use the posted coordinates to kind of deduct the numbers. Maybe that will help you decipher the source, but in many of them, I never find out the source at all. I don't know exactly what the source is. I just know that it is a smileys and that each one represents a number. So in here, the first one is a 5 because that is the north. The second one is a 2. And since this smiley is used in other areas as well, as you see here, I know that this one has been a 5 at all. And the same one for the other, for the east coordinates in this case, 0, 0, 4. So I know this has to be a 4, which matches. But then I know the next one can't be a 4. Well, in this case, I'm lucky it's a 5. But because of the 2-mile radius, I know that maybe it could be a 6 if it was a different one. But in this case, it's the same one. And in this case, I get quite lucky because there is only one emoji in this case that I don't know what it is. And so there's really only 10 combinations where this one could be hidden. And so that's what I end up doing, is just replacing this ones with all the logical answers. And here it's even simpler because it is 7 for the degrees. So this is most likely either a 6, a 7, or an 8. It can't be a 5 because a 5 has already been used. Potentially it might be a 9, but it would have to be something. So there might only be 3 or 4 combinations that you have to try, where you have to see which one is a good coordinate, either using the geochecker or look on the map and see what is value coordinate. Um, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different sources. There's really only one source that is standardized and constant, and I will talk about that later, which is the Unicode list. All the other ones you kind of have to hope to find the right source, whether it's the right application, and hoping that it doesn't change over time. But yeah, the situation where each smiley just represents a number is a very common way of how smileys are used. So in the video where I talk about the usual suspects of geocaching puzzles, I talk about some of the standards. I also have a specific video where I talk about binary codes. And so binary codes are often with zeros and ones. But you don't have to use zeros and ones. You could be any number, and I explained that in those videos as well. So why not use smileys? I'm using only 2 smileys here, so it's easy. One must be 0, the other one must be 1. And now this is going to be a binary number. And so once you convert them to zeros and ones, you get a binary number. You use a converter to convert it back to coordinate, and you're done. But with smileys, who says that it is this? It could be smiling and not smiling ones. And so there could be many of different ones used, as long as you can divide them into 2 groups, either by color or by type or by something else. You can create a binary code. And it doesn't have to be a binary code. It could be Braille. It could be some other code that can easily be converted to smileys. It could be Morse code. Some represent dash, some represent dots. Smileys come in different ways, and so there's many smileys that will look like dashes. So when you see a smiley, just try to think, could this be one of the usual suspects? And so for more information about the usual suspects, I recommend watching that video. It gives lots of good examples. But yeah, smileys is an easy way to draw something out that is not the standard zeros and ones. Here is another popular example. We see here a bunch of smiley characters. Now, the one thing that's hard to show here in the video is that this is not a picture. These are actually the individual characters that are being placed on the page. And that is important for this type of puzzle. And I call it here emoji art because we're going to draw something. And in this case, we're going to draw the actual coordinates. But to do that, we need to manipulate the smileys a little bit. And you can do that in different ways. And I'm just showing you a technique of how to do that. But there is a variety of techniques how to do that. But important is, it cannot be a picture. It has to be individual characters. If the cache owner did this using a picture, it would be a lot of work to solve. If they are there as characters, so that you can actually copy and paste them, it is a lot more solvable. And I'm going to show you how. Okay, so here I'm going to show you how you solve one of those, what I call emoji art graphics type puzzles. I'm using here one of my own websites, the Now Listen to Me transform text one, but you can use any other one that allows you to have a window that is resizable, like this. Because it needs to be copied and pasted like text. So this information is just a text field, so I can just type in text, but emojis are just characters, they're just text as well. So you can copy and paste them if they're not a picture, and paste them into, well, for example, this window, what I'm doing right here. And if that is possible, you might have to deal with the emoji art. If that is not possible, it may not be this type of puzzle, and there's maybe something else going on. Maybe you have to use the first letters of each one of their names. We'll talk about that in a bit. But by doing this, I can rescale this image into any format. And basically, it's the same characters. I'm just reducing the number of lines and number of characters, so I can make it very long, or I can make it like only having a few columns. Now, as I mentioned, we're talking here about a visual puzzle. So we want to have something that is visually recognizable. So it is a little bit of experimentation, and you can see when in certain formats, it almost looks like there is a pattern forming. So it suggests we're on the right track. It looks like the yellows are going to tell us something at some point. Can't really see what yet because it doesn't really look recognizable. And a hint is that it is not a perfect square yet. We want something that is a perfect square. So let's start with making it very long first. And let's see when we can make a perfect square. Well, this is a perfect square. We can see that. We can see it now. It is basically 7 by some number. And again, we see numbers there. There's something else that shows us that we're on the right track. Because if I count the number of colored yellow blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, that is very close to a good coordinate, right? Where you need typically between 13 and 15 digits. So we're basically going to resize and hope that at some point we see something that we physically recognize, hoping that a square will help us in the right way. So we're basically trying to make it so that we get nicely aligned, that they are divided. Now, there may be a lot of combinations there, or there might be a few, and we're just going to keep doing that till we get a good combination. And see, every now and then we get something that almost looks like it's going to tell us something, and we just keep doing that till we, hey, wait a minute, this looks pretty good. We see an even character, and there is something else that shows us we're on the right track. Look at this nice line of all the same emojis. Now, this might be a little bit harder to see, and there's different ways to make it more visible. So we can zoom in or we can zoom out, and it might become more readable that we're actually looking about numbers here. So depending on your resolution, it might be easier to see in one resolution or the other, but actually it's drawing out numbers here. You see here 3, 4, 1, 2, 5, 9, 0, and then the next one 8, 4, 0, 1, 6, 4, 9. So that is what this puzzle was. It basically had to do with a bunch of chaos at the beginning, but then if we kind of like restructured it and divided the number of smileys over lines and columns, then we could actually get something readable out of it. And just one more time, here we see that. So here we saw all the chaos, and then once we had it reordered, we saw nicely that they were organized in the number of characters that you had. And of course, this could be easier or harder to recognize. Could be using many different variants. They don't all have to use the same smiley. It could be that it's just all yellow smileys versus non-yellow smileys. There's many different variations, but the idea is the same. If you somehow organize it into the right number of rows and columns using the resizing technique that I used, it is very easy to solve. Okay, now there's one more technique, and this is a very important one, but it's also a very technical one. But that is, as I mentioned, each smiley is actually unique across platforms. So Unicode, which is where all the characters that are really commonly agreed upon amongst any language, amongst any standard, there's thousands of characters defined in there, including the standard letters and numbers and the symbols, but also emojis are defined in that. And every now and then a new version comes out where now new emojis are added to the list, and that means that new devices, new operating systems like Windows and Mac will start supporting those. Now note, they don't all have to look the same. So for example, I show here the smiley emojis, and on different platforms they may look slightly different, but they're still the smiley emoji. So that is the way that it's interpreted, but they all have a number. And so here you see a hexadecimal number, and I will show that in later as well. And they all have a standard name. And this is of course ideal to make puzzles, because you can display an emoji, or the cache owner can display an emoji, knowing that there is a fixed number associated with that. And they can use the last number, the last two numbers, anything, or the first letter. So for example, it's a G, and then this one starts with a B, and there is one for every letter of the alphabet. So you can easily spell any text, any word with emojis by just taking the very letter. And of course, there's multiple that are the same. These both start with a G. There's many that start with any letter, so you don't have to use the same emoji for the same letter. You can use a different emoji every time you use that same letter, as long as the name is, of course, accommodating that. So you can spell out words using emojis by just saying every time you use the first letter, or you can spell out numbers by saying, well, this emoji starts with the ends with the number 3. So if I did display emoji, the last digit is the number 3. And that's where these two lists come in play. There's many places on the internet where you can find these. These are just two that I typically use to kind of like, if I see emojis, to kind of verify, is this an emoji and is this a puzzle that uses the number? So let's take a look at those websites. So this is the Wikipedia page, and it tells me that there's currently over 3,700 emojis that are currently standardized within the current list of 15.1. And it gives me a very quick overview of what all of them are, including their number, and each of them links to the Wikipedia page that is associated. So that gives me a nice cross-reference, and I can see if I recognize the symbols, and for example, to see if something is an emoji. But all of them are listed here, all the characters, and all of them have a standard number, a hexadecimal number that we talked about. So here are the smileys, and that was what I used for the initial substitution. I used those. So this is a good list, but you can't search in this list by their name. You see the name once you have found it. So if you found this is a scooter emoji. It will tell me that the different ones, so frown emoji, what they are, calendar emoji. So, but I can't really search for it. So it has limited use, but the advantage is it loads very fast. The complete list can be found on this page. This is on the Unicode website, but it loads very slow. I've actually loaded an offline copy for myself that I created, so I don't have to wait for this page loading because of how big it is. Because there is thousands of this, but the advantage is that all of them have the display behind it. So once you've loaded them all and search, for example, for the word wood, then it will find it on this page. It will tell you that there is one with that name wood right here. And so I can search within this different description, and I can search them by name, while the other one cannot. So it loads a lot slower, but it has the advantage of search by name. There's other websites that do the same thing. But important again is that it lists the name, and then from there on, you can also get the number. Note that this is the hexadecimal name. So of course, if we go to a specific one, that this doesn't have to be the name that we use. Note that if you have the name, for example, like this one, you can actually just search for that name because it is all a standard character. So you can search for that name and it will come up, and then most likely you will come up with the Unicode emoji as well. So you see here, for example, there is an Emojipedia, and now we can go there and you can get more information about these emojis, because these are characters. These are not, they are represented as images, but in a way they're nothing different than any letter or anything. So you can treat them as such, and now you get more information, for example, when they were introduced in what operating system. So that may again help you in decoding or might be part of the puzzle. So important to remember here is that emojis have standard numbers, they have standard names. If they are not as part of an image, so you can individually select them, similar like you can select letters of the alphabet on the page, then you can search for them, you can find them in a list, you can Google search them, you can figure out what they mean, the official meaning of them, and that might help you decode a certain puzzle. There's many other variants of emoji puzzles. This was just a few examples. But with these, we'll get you started with some of these, and most of them will have you go into one of these routes. Either they're a standard puzzle, or they might use the name or the number and you have to decode them somewhere using their unique name and unique number. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please like it, so that way other people can find it as well. If you want to stay informed when I publish new videos, please subscribe. Try to cover new subjects all the time. And if you want to leave a comment, feel free. Always happy to hear feedback. You can also contact me on the Waterfan 5 on the geocaching.com website, or you can send me an email at geocacher.waterfan5@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, and hope that it will help you solve some more mystery caches. Thank you.